All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this workplace masterclass with Motion Connected. I'm really excited for our webinar today and to introduce you to Cynthia Congliaro. Cynthia is a seasoned expert in health, wellness, and organizational resilience. With over 20 years of experience, Cynthia has delivered impactful presentations to companies nationwide on topics like emotional well being, healthy corporate cultures, resilience, and work life balance. As the founder of WorkWell Webinars and a certified trainer in mindset and stress management, Cynthia will bring you all a wealth of knowledge and practical strategies to help individuals and organizations thrive. So let's get ready for an engaging session filled with actionable insights to support well-being and professional growth. I'm turning it over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that introduction. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm sure you're very busy, and the fact that you took time out of your day to attend this webinar is so appreciated. I think we'll have a lot to go over today, so I do want to go ahead and dive right in. But before I do that, please put comments and questions in the chat. It will be tricky for me to see those comments and questions as I'm presenting, but Sarah probably will be keeping a close eye on that for me. And she promised to interrupt if it sounds like there's people that have questions or just a lot of comments, because this is a really interesting topic. And I do always love to see what people are saying in the chat about my comments, if they have any questions. So please keep that chat going.
Those of you that are familiar with us or not, Motion Connect is an employee experience platform. I thought you had this at this point, Cynthia. We have been working with organizations and workplaces for over about 16 years now on well-being, benefits navigation, benefits education, and just inspiring healthy choices. And at the heart of it, it really comes down to culture. And that's why we have talks like this and great speakers to bring you content on making cultures great.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So Sarah's already given you kind of my background. Here's my contact information. Just a little bit about me. Strong background in organizational wellness. I've done a lot of work with organizations across the country on a lot of what we'll be talking about today. Communication, leadership, culture, dealing with corporate change, burnout. And my business, WorkWell Webinars, kind of feeds off all those topics. So what we do is we design and we deliver webinars on a whole variety of topics that really impact both individual wellness, so mental health, topics like resilience, depression, anxiety, as well as physical health, topics like eating for longevity, sleep habits, and as well as organizational wellness, a lot of what we'll be talking about today. So culture, communication, team building, and the topic at hand, which is corporate empathy. So a bit about what we'll be covering today. We'll be talking about a lot. And if there's any particular aspect of empathy that you have an interest in learning more about, I'd love to hear what that is. So please put that in the chat if anything comes up as I'm talking and you say, you know what, I'd love to hear a little bit about this or more about that. Please write that in the chat for us. But we'll be talking about empathy and performance and how being empathetic actually impacts the performance of your employees in the company, as well as your own performance. We'll be talking about emotional intelligence, which is a super interesting topic in my opinion, and how emotional intelligence and empathy kind of go hand in hand and the interplay between those two topics. We'll talk about the importance of empathic listening. As a social worker and mental health professional, this is something that I have extensive training in. How can you listen to someone else where you can be practicing empathy and you can be there for them and present? And what we're finding is many more leaders are interested in learning more about this concept of empathic listening. So the skills that we hear about a lot in the counseling world and the mental health space are being transferred over to the business world. You'll hear about team building and how empathy can actually enhance team building. So, what are the benefits of empathy for your team? You'll hear about leadership and how empathy can help you as a leader, and why leaders who practice empathy are, in more cases than not, considered more effective and better leaders. I just went to a 2-day conference in Boston, where I'm from, on leadership, and we had a lot of content around the impact of empathy around leadership. We'll talk a bit about measuring empathy, which is a very interesting subject in my opinion. And we'll talk about some companies that are known for being more empathy focused. Those are companies that I'm sure you've all heard of because they're very big, well-known companies. And I'll just share some kind of tidbits about what they're doing in the space of empathy. And then we'll close with some empathy building activities, some kind of take-home strategies you can think about doing with your own team. A lot of what we'll be learning about today will be topics that you can apply to your workspace, so your employer, as well as your teammates. But a lot of the empathy topic can be applied to your personal life as well. So a lot of what I'm going to be saying, you can also apply to your own kind of personal situation. Maybe it's with your family or with your friends. But empathy is a very important concept to have a better understanding of. So if anyone has any comments about how they would define and describe empathy, please feel free to put that in the chat, because I always like to hear what people say about how they define empathy. And there are quite a few definitions of empathy. This is one of my favorites because it's fairly straightforward. Empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel, to see things from their viewpoint, and imagine yourself in their place. So that's kind of in my opinion, a great, pretty straightforward definition of empathy. And some people will confuse empathy with weakness. And I find that especially when I'm working with leaders in the corporate world, they'll say, well, I'm not so sure I want to show empathy. And we'll be talking about that as I move forward in this presentation. But empathy definitely should not be seen as an actual weakness. It really is more about what is affecting performance. Someone who is practicing empathy is looking at an employee who maybe isn't performing as well as he or she has in the past, and it's trying to kind of think beyond what's going on in terms of why this might be happening. Could it be a situation this employee is struggling with, something outside of the workplace? So it's kind of looking past what's going on to try and understand the other person's viewpoint as well. And we'll talk about strategies for doing that, because it can sometimes be tricky. There are certain situations where it can be hard to show empathy, and I'll talk with you about that too. I love this slide. It's just kind of quick description of empathy here. So let's talk a bit about empathy in the corporation. So we're finding more people are interested in this topic. There's more leaders who are reaching out to us about empathy training. There's more evidence that companies that practice empathy actually show a lot of positive results. And what I mean by positive results, there's been many studies done that indicate that companies that are more inclined to practice empathy have more productive employees, have employees that stay longer at the company, have employees that are less apt to call in sick at work, and have employees that are more satisfied on the job. So there's definitely a business case for empathy. And there's been so much research done on this. UPenn just did a huge study. They looked at, I think it was over 3,000 companies, and they found that employees were not only happier at work, they were more creative, and like I mentioned, they were more productive. So there's definitely a business case behind why leaders want to practice empathy in the corporation. So empathy and performance. So in general, it's been found that Empathy tends to increase engagement. So employees are more apt to be interested and engaged not only with their manager, but with their coworkers, their teammates. So empathy does tend to increase engagement, which is obviously a huge benefit. I mentioned in the slide earlier that there's been found to be an increase in productivity, and there are a lot of reasons behind that. If employers are practicing empathy, productivity is more likely to happen as employees are feeling more welcome at work, they're feeling more motivated at work, and they'll be more productive. They'll also be more apt to be able to handle complicated tasks. They're likely to reach out to other employees, their teammates, so there's more sharing going on. And that's definitely something that we find here with the work that we do in terms of productivity. Empathy tends to build connections. People are more apt to talk to one another, less silos at work. They're more apt to reach out to their teammates. And this is true, obviously, in the personal space as well. If someone is exhibiting empathy, the other person is more apt to feel safe with sharing whatever it is he or she is dealing with. And in general, we find that empathy helps with conflict resolution. There's less apt to be a competitive situation between people. People are more likely to want to collaborate and work together at the challenge, whatever it is. So that really helps with situations that can be stressful and lead to increased conflict. There's been a lot of studies on empathy and performance. I mentioned the study out of UPenn around creativity. Employees are more apt to be more creative when we see companies that are more empathetic. They're feeling safe in these situations. The thing about why I think it's so important to talk about empathy in the corporate space is we are in our environment, in our work environment, many, many hours. And this is actually a topic that I do quite a few presentations and webinars on. And it's this topic of work-life balance. And many of us are struggling with how to practice work-life balance. Many people are kind of working around the clock, so to speak. We see this in some industries more than others, such as consulting or high tech, but we see it in all industries where people are working a lot of hours, so we're spending a long time in the corporate space. And for that reason, this is why we often find it important to really focus on the topics such as empathy at work. We want to make the work environment a place where employees are happy, where they're thriving, and it's not what we describe as a toxic culture, where employees are feeling that their managers are there to listen, where they feel heard, where they feel they can express their viewpoints. So we can see the strengths that the skills that are strengthened by empathy by this slide, identifying needs, creativity, collaboration, negotiation, so many skills. So empathic connections and performance. So what we find is in general, communication is more apt to be open. We find that people are more willing to share how they're feeling, how their workload is, if they're in need of help, if they're just feeling that they're burned out and they can't handle whatever it is their employer is asking them to finish. So communication increases, which is fantastic. Conflict goes down. There tends to be a feeling of mutual respect. People feel they're respected, which is very, very important in the corporate space. Some of the reasons that people leave a company is they don't feel respected. They don't feel that their manager is really respecting who they are and how they're working. I've had many people, we lead focus groups and we have a lot of surveys that we do with companies, and a lot of people will share that they just don't feel like their boss is recognizing how hard they're actually working. They don't feel that their teammates really respect what they're doing. So that mutual respect is very, very important, as is the focus that goes to more of a win-win strategy. It's less about competition and it's more about kind of the mutual benefits where people are collaborating and working together. So lots of reasons behind why empathy can impact the corporation from so many levels. Corporations are complicated, right? There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of things happening. So this is a very significant topic to discuss. So I mentioned earlier on the topic of emotional intelligence, and here's a definition. There are many of them out there, but emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our emotions, as well as the emotions of others. I'm not sure if anyone here knows much about this topic or has any comments they'd like to share in the chat about anyone that maybe they would describe as someone with a high EQ. I know there's people in my life that I would describe as having a high EQ. These are people that just kind of tend to go a little deeper and kind of better understand how the other person is feeling and can put themselves in the other person's shoes, which is really what empathy is all about, which is why those two topics do go so hand in hand. So the components of emotional intelligence, the first would be self-awareness. It's really the ability to be aware of your own self. I actually just went to a very interesting presentation this past weekend when I went to the leadership conference on a topic called emotional agility. It's a topic that I hadn't heard much about, but super interesting. And it's all about trying to move past something and being aware of your own emotions. So this self-awareness is very important for empathy as well, because being aware of how you're feeling and how you're feeling at the time when someone is sharing how they are feeling is very important. I wish I could get into that topic more, but due to the time constraints we have today, I can't talk too much about that. Self-regulation, that's very important as well. That's a key component of emotional intelligence. How are you regulating your emotions? How are you responding? Are you responding too quickly? Are you reacting with emotions in a way that maybe isn't the best response? Sometimes it helps to kind of process how you're feeling, take a deep breath, and perhaps even respond later. Maybe that means holding off on that email or that text to your colleague who maybe had upset you, but really trying to practice self-regulation. That's the key to emotional intelligence as well as to empathy. Motivation, that's a key component of emotional intelligence. We talked about empathy and social skills. Those are important as well. And there's a lot around this topic that you can research, you can look at some studies, and you can do your own testing. There's lots of free resources out there to try and determine where you stand in the EQ or the emotional intelligence space. So empathic listening is a very important component to empathy. I think I mentioned that earlier on. It's something that I have extensive training in as a social worker and as a coach. We are trained in how to be empathic when we listen, how to develop that deeper connection. We're finding it also in the workplace as well. Many leaders are interested in how they can become better leaders, and that spills over to their personal life as well. There's many benefits to empathic listening. In general, empathic listening tends to build trust and respect. People will feel like they're in a safe space, when they feel like they're being listened to in an empathic way. And what I mean by that is if you're listening in a way that is showing that you're not actually listening, meaning maybe your body language is showing that you're not actually listening. Maybe you're on your phone, maybe you're texting as you're saying, okay, I understand. But if you're texting while you're doing that, obviously you're not actively listening. If you're in a crowded room with lots of distractions and you're kind of looking around the room and you're not paying attention, that's going to be a harder situation to actually build trust and respect. So that's very important when you're trying to build that trust and respect from your colleagues, from the employees you work with, as well as anyone in your life. Empathic listening enables the release of emotions. So what I mean by that is you are setting that safe space that we look for so often when we're coaching and when we're doing therapy. We really try to encourage other people to release their emotions. I've had so many employees say to me, I just don't feel I can tell the person I work for how I feel. I'm just too afraid to share the fact that I feel like I'm not valued in this company, that I'm given too much work, that no one notices how hard I actually try, and really trying to set up the situation where an employee can share his or her emotions, be it frustration, be it anxiety, be it even anger, whatever emotion it is, to try and encourage that person to share. It also leads to reduction in tension. A lot of employees say that when they're able to share how they're feeling, they feel less anxiety, they feel more relaxed, and in the end, they're better able to actually perform. And there's been a lot of studies done on that. It encourages the surfacing of information, so employees are more apt to share how they're feeling. That goes hand in hand with the release of emotions, and it creates that safe environment that I just described. So, a few tips for empathic listening. The first is try to be non judgmental. And this is often, in my opinion, one of the hardest steps to empathic listening because it's pretty easy for us to place judgment. That's what we do as humans, right? We judge other people. We judge people in our day to day interactions, in our personal interactions, as well as in the workplace. And sometimes just trying to put your judgment aside, and again, this is very hard in some cases, but just trying to put your judgment kind of in the back burner for a few minutes and try to look from the other person's perspective. So I'm going to give you an example of how that can look. So there's an employee, let's just call him employee Tom, who hasn't been showing up at work so much lately. He'll maybe show up late, and when he does attend meetings, which he doesn't attend meetings the way he used to because he's apparently just too busy, he shows up in a way that just shows a lot of disinterest and he's not paying attention. Maybe he's looking down a lot or just kind of staring at the screen or not showing his screen on his Zoom calls. So the first reaction might be, he's just really not interested. He's just lazy, he's bored at work, and he doesn't seem to like his job anymore. But trying to put judgment aside, you might want to remember that a couple months down the road, Tom had a very difficult situation. His mother's been very sick with cancer, and he just went through a very difficult divorce. On top of that, he got in a bad car accident. So trying to remember the different aspects of your employee that or your coworker or even someone who you know, a friend, a family member, and trying to not place judgment and recognize that there's a lot of sides to every human being. So to put that judgment aside for a few minutes. The next tip is to give the person your undivided attention. I mentioned that in the earlier slide. So if a colleague of yours says to you, you know what, I really want to talk with you. I'm having a really tough issue at work. That might be a time that you say, can we have that conversation in a closed door versus in the cafeteria? Or let's not have that conversation, in the boardroom where we have people walking in and out. So really trying to give the person who wants to talk with you your undivided attention can be super helpful. You want to show that you are actively versus passively listening. You want to listen carefully to feelings and facts. And you want to do that in various ways. You want to look at how the other person is exhibiting his or her feelings. Does she show that she's distraught? Is she perhaps starting to tear up? Is she getting emotional? Is she really showing that she's just not in a safe place? And what exactly is she saying? Are you really listening to what that person is saying? And you can show you're listening carefully by your own body language, by nodding your head, and even the phrases you use, like, I understand what you're saying, or that must have been really, really difficult. So trying to validate the other person is very helpful. Restating and paraphrasing can be helpful as well. So what you're saying to me, John, is that you just don't feel like you're given the kind of positive affirmation you're looking for in the workplace. You're doing lots of work, you're getting lots of awards, yet no one's acknowledging that. Your coworkers don't really recognize the fact that you are doing so well with your sales strategy. So really trying to restate and paraphrase and rephrase what you're hearing can be super helpful. And it's helpful also because you might actually not be interpreting things correctly. Your coworker might say, actually, no, that's not what I meant. So that can help as well. So trying to listen patiently, very, very helpful as well. You don't want to be rushed in this situation. I know I've been in situations where people have asked me to talk with them, and maybe I just don't have time. Maybe I'm actually running out the door. And that's actually an opportunity for you to say to them, you know what, can we actually table this till tomorrow morning when I'm fresh and I'm not running out the door to try to make it to my next appointment? Can we just maybe table this for another time when I can really listen to what you have to say to me? That can be super helpful. And you want to show acceptance. You want to really show that you understand the other person is wanting to talk with you, is going through a difficult time, and that you understand that this is a situation that does need some support, be it that maybe you want to bring in another coworker if that person's interested in that, or maybe you want to bring in a teammate that has more skills than that other person. And you can say, you know what? I think I'd like to bring Tom into this conversation because he knows a lot more about this and he can probably help you with that problem you're having with how you're trying to analyze that data for the presentation. So trying to show acceptance is helpful. So empathy and team building is a very hot topic. This is something that we at WorkWell Webinars get a lot of requests for. There's a lot of evidence out there that team building builds trust among team members. And this can be seen even in, I do a lot of talks on team building, and there's been studies around team building on sports teams, which is super interesting. You know, sports teams, obviously, when you're on a sports team, whatever sport it is, football, soccer, baseball, it doesn't matter. You need to make sure there's trust between the teammates. And when there's trust, teammates are going to perform better. So we see this time and time again. And there's a lot of strategies for trying to build trust between between team members that we'll be talking about in the coming slides as well. Empathy also leads to greater cooperation between team members. So team members are more apt to ask for help between on tasks, which is fantastic because many people have different skills, let's face it. Not everyone is good at certain things. Maybe one person on the team is more quantitative. Maybe the other person loves to write and they're more qualitative. Maybe, you know, another employee feels like they can bring someone else on the team who has more skills. So that cooperative attitude can be super helpful, and having an empathic kind of atmosphere on your team is great. You know, saying things like, you know, we're a team, and recognizing differences between teammates, personal situations like, you know, so and so is going through a hard time right now. I think we need to maybe support him on whatever it is he's dealing with. I see that Samantha wrote that she does quarterly team building events. That's fantastic. You know, a lot of teams are doing more in the way of teamwork, which is so great. And I know with the work that I do, we do a lot around team building, and it's just proving in many times that team building and teamwork can be something that can be developed and learned, which is great. So overall, there's increased productivity and job satisfaction when we have empathy and team building. You know, most people I talk with actually enjoy working as a team. I'm not going to say I always hear that. I have people I work with that will say to me, I actually don't like working in teams. I prefer doing my own work. I work better on my own, and that's all good. It's no requirement to work in a team. But many people will say that they enjoy the team environment, or at least a mixture of team environments, because this is an opportunity to get support. You know, if there's situations that come up where you say, you know what, this is something I don't really know a lot about, you can then reach out to your team and get support. So there's a lot of benefits between team building and why empathy can be used to establish a more cohesive team. I know for me, in my work, in my team, I have found that empathy has made for a very cohesive team, and I can tell you more about that in the coming slides. So empathy and leadership, this is definitely a hot issue. I think I mentioned to you, I just went to a leadership, 2-day leadership workshop, and we talked about all different types of issues, but one of them was empathy and how empathy can really come into play with leadership. Many employees are asking more for their leaders. There's been a lot of studies done on this, where employees are expecting their manager or even their teammates to be supportive of them. And they are expecting them, in a sense, to show empathy. It's no longer a situation where employees just kind of go to work and they do their own thing. People are recognizing the value of how employees are treated at work and how we can make the work environment a better place. Because as I mentioned, we are spending so much time in the workplace. And we all have heard the term burnout. I hear about it so often. It's actually one of my most requested webinars is on burnout and why burnout is happening and how we can decrease burnout. And a lot of that does involve empathy. So the signs of burnout, if anyone wants to share in the chat here, what they consider to be a sign of burnout, because there are many, but these are some that I see most. I see this both in my clients, individual, as well in the group work I do with companies. First, we hear a lot about low motivation. So Tom used to really love contributing at meetings. He used to ask for more work. He'd volunteer to take on that project. And then we'll hear that this actually is going away. We'll hear that Tom is no longer doing that. He's showing up to the meeting, he's not showing his screen, he's not asking for more work, and he's barely getting done the work that we assign him. So basically, motivation is going down. We see employees that talk about feeling stressed. And like you can see in this picture, this is the classic sign, hands on forehead, looking down. So you can see the physical sign of stress. You can hear employees talking about it. I'm just so stressed. I'm feeling stressed. I'm overwhelmed. I'm just unable to do my job. So that's clearly a sign of burnout. Productivity goes down. Oftentimes people will say to us, we can't get done what we used to get done. Things are not getting completed the way they used to. And that's due to the decrease in productivity. People are burned out. They're physically unable to accomplish tasks. And what I mean by that is maybe they're burning the candle at both ends. I'm working with a consulting firm now. They're sometimes working 60 plus hours a week. These are people that are not sleeping the way they're supposed to be sleeping. They're maybe not eating the way they're supposed to be eating. They're literally burned out physically and emotionally. We hear about frequent illnesses with burnout. People physically, like I just mentioned, they're not taking care of themselves. I do a lot of presentations on self-care, and they're not taking care of themselves. They're burnt out, and as a result, they are not sleeping well, and they often will get sick. So they're not coming into work because they are ill. So as a result, productivity goes down. So you can see how so many things are related here. People will say that they're noticing their colleague is more irritable. They're snapping more. They're not that kind person that they used to be. And that's a result of burnout. So we see this a lot. Managers snapping at employees, or even in the personal space, spouses snapping at each other, or a mother snapping at her son or daughter. People become irritable when they're burned out. I'm looking in the chat here. You see here not feeling appreciated, lack of passion, increased negativity, all those things. Overwhelm, that goes hand in hand with the stress that often happens with people who are just taking on too much. Fatigue, apathy, that's linked with low motivation. People just are not interested. They're showing they're bored. And then that feeling of being underappreciated that I talked about a few slides earlier. These are all burnout signs. So it is super important to what we describe as lead with empathy. It's super important to build those meaningful connections. So this is something that I do. We have leadership coaching. We show people how they can lead with more empathy. We often will encourage leaders to navigate the interpersonal relationships with compassion, regardless of whether or not they've shared their experience. And so what I mean by that is, many employees will tell you things that maybe you never have gone through. Maybe you've never experienced what they're saying. And this goes with your personal life as well. But really trying to show compassion, even if it's a situation that you yourself have never witnessed, that you yourself have never experienced. And sometimes it's super difficult to have that empathic feeling. And people in our empathy training will actually say in the beginning that it almost feels forced. It almost feels forced to feel empathetic. And this is something that with time, we all like to say empathy is a skill, and we'll talk about that in the coming slides. But this is something that you can develop with time and it becomes easier. So there's a term called cognitive empathy, and this is a learned skill-based form of empathy. And what that means is you're saying to the other person, I understand how you feel. So that's what we describe as cognitive empathy. And there's also a term called compassionate empathy. And that is what you're saying to the other person is, I want to help you with what you're going through. So that's more of an emotional form of empathy that, in a sense, comes from the heart. You are simply saying to the other person, I want to help you. And both forms of empathy are very, very important. So these are a few books that I'd recommend that kind of address these topics that I just have gone through with you. The first is a book that was written by the owner of a company that I've worked for 5 years, Dr. Joel Bennett from OWLS, Organizational Wellness and Learning Systems. And Heart-Centered Leadership is a fantastic book about leading well and living well. And it's basically practicing empathy and leadership in a different way. It's looking at your employees or even people in your life, not even from an employer standpoint, even from a personal level. It's the way you're interacting with other people and the way you are thinking about not just yourself, but the other person. So I highly recommend this book. There's also a book by Helen Rice called The Empathy Effect, and she does a fantastic job at actually teaching empathy. So this book is a great example of empathy not being an inborn trait. While empathy can be something that is inborn, because studies have proven that some people are actually more empathic than others, it is a skill that you can learn. And I personally think that Helen's exercises and her training are very effective for teaching people about empathy. The final book I have here is called Simply Said. And this book is about empathy, but it's more about communication and how to communicate better at work as well as in your personal space. And the thing I like about this book is so much about the way we communicate impacts other people. And that goes in your personal life as well as in your business life. The way you are talking to other people, people notice that. They notice how you're saying things. How did you tell your employee you didn't think he did well on that report? How did you tell your employee you didn't like how she did her presentation yesterday? So the way you talk is very, very important. So it's important to think about how you're communicating, and this book will tell you a lot about that. So there's a lot of ways that we go about measuring corporate empathy. There's a lot of research behind this, and I wish I could get into the details around this, and there just isn't enough time. But one of the ways is through customer feedback. This is when we look at empathy and how the employer or the company is interacting with their customers. This is actually a very important indication. We look at surveys and we say in our surveys, well, what is this survey demonstrating? How is the company actually interacting with their customers? Are they responding quickly? Are they ignoring emails and phone calls? Or how are they interacting on the phone with that person who's experiencing frustration with whatever it is you are selling or whatever service you're offering? So that customer feedback is very, very important. Employee self-assessments are also very important with measuring empathy. We look at what employees are saying in their assessments. We look at those surveys and how are they describing the corporate culture? What are they saying about their employer? What are they indicating about how happy they are at work? Are they being recognized? Are they getting that time off they're asking for? Are they experiencing burnout? Are their employees interacting with them in ways that they are looking for? Are they feeling like there's collaboration? So, employee self assessments are very, very important for us when we're looking at how the employee is actually faring in terms of empathy. And then, of course, observation and coaching. We do a lot of actually observing. We ask employees to interact with one another, with their colleagues, and with their managers. So that can be a really important way to look at empathy. Even just looking at the org chart, that can be helpful as well. How is that organization looking? Is there a lot of hierarchy in the organization? Is there a lot, are there levels in the organization? Is there opportunities for collaboration? Do employees say, you know what, it's pretty much a closed door policy in my company. I never talk to my CEO. I barely hear from my manager. Sometimes I'll talk to my teammates, but for the most part, we're kind of all on our own. Sometimes in employee situations that are remote, if employees are all over the country, sometimes all over the world, we hear situations like this where people just aren't feeling there's a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration, and sometimes they're feeling very frustrated because they're not having a lot of interaction with people they're working for. And that can be difficult. So we'll work with them on how to encourage more collaboration. We'll look at how the organization actually measures happiness and purpose. Are they only focused on the bottom line? Or are they interested on how their employees actually value their time in the company? Is it important for them for their employees to be happy? And I have that in the next bullet here, happiness. How satisfied are the existing and their past employees with their employer? And so we'll ask for survey information, we'll do focus groups, and this will all be confidential. But it's super important for us to hear how satisfied and how happy are the employees. Is there a lot of turnover in the company? We hear about employees that are continually leaving their company, and they're no longer able to basically stay in their role because they're just so unhappy. And then other companies where employees just don't leave. They'll say to me, you know what? These employees have been here for so many years, and people don't want to leave this company because we're just so happy here. And of course, we love hearing that, right? We love those kind of companies where people are happy, they're feeling rewarded, they're feeling valued, they're feeling appreciated, and they're feeling, basically like their work environment is a culture where they want to be. They actually look forward to going to work on Monday, and that's what we like to hear. So a few empathy-focused companies, and there are many of them, but these are one that I'm sure you have all heard of, I'm sure. Microsoft, Facebook, Tesla, Google, and Apple, they do so much around trying to make sure that their company is an empathy-focused company. Microsoft has a very interesting program called the Lab program in Microsoft Garage. And what they encourage by these programs is they encourage sharing between departments. So if someone's in the department of, for instance, project management, if they want to take some time, maybe going into the marketing department to experience what they're doing in that department, Microsoft highly encourages that people do this. And what we find, and Microsoft has said this to us, is that when employees are talking to one another in these departments, they are interacting more, they're getting to know each other more on a personal level, and they're experiencing a lot more job satisfaction. So not only are they're more apt to share with one another and support each other, they're happier at work because they're feeling more collaboration, which is fantastic because I talk to many people who will say to me, there's just not a lot of information sharing in my company. Departments don't talk to one another. And it's just not a situation where people are communicating. And I'm not sure if anyone here in the audience has anything they want to share about that. Facebook does a great job at really recognizing what goes on outside the workplace. And what I mean by that is they are so great about flex time programs. So if an employee comes to their manager and says, you know what, I'm going through a really tough time right now with my mother. I really would love some time, maybe one day a week to work from home so I can spend some time with her and I can be able to be there for her as she's going through this difficult time. So recognizing that employees have situations happening outside of work can be super helpful with programs like Facebook is with their flex time programs, be it with some children or personal issues that go on. Tesla is a huge proponent of having in-house medical clinics and healthcare reimbursement. Tesla strongly believes that an employee who is healthy in body as well as mind is a more productive employee. So this is, in my opinion, a great example to the employees at Tesla that Tesla values the employee both in a personal as well as professional level. So this is a demonstration of empathy and an empathic company. Google, like Facebook, is really focused on work-life balance and flex time programs. They have strong maternity, paternity, and child rearing expenses. So ways to support the employee that demonstrate empathy and the fact that employees are more than just employees. They are also human beings dealing with a lot outside of the workplace. And Apple has a fantastic wellness center. It's available to part-time employees as well as full-time employees. And like the other companies here, Apple really wants to send the message that the employee is important for what they do for the company, but employees are also important for them as human beings and as people. So there's lots of empathy building activities out there. There's many people that ask me, can you do some examples for me of what might be an empathy building activity? Just going to quickly check the time here. I need to move fairly quickly through this, but we often will do what's known as a kindness challenge. And it's pretty straightforward. What we ask is that employees basically pick out 3 things they'd like to do with another employee. And they can be super basic, like going out for coffee with an employee, sending a nice email about what this person's done, or maybe encouraging an employee to do something for himself, like go out and maybe, take off, a day from work. And this is what we describe as the kindness challenge. And we recommend that people share what they're doing with their employee for the kindness challenge as an example of some empathy building activities. We do role reversals as well, where employees put themselves in other people's shoes, which can be super interesting. You can step into the shoes of a customer service representative when you've never been in customer service to feel what it feels like when this person's hearing that criticism that customer service reps often feel. We have the compassion walk, which is basically walking another person's shoes, literally walking around the company as if you are the CEO or as if you are the project manager. And it's super interesting. At my company, we do kudos at the start of every meeting, and this is an opportunity to share when someone has done something that we think is exceptional. So you give kudos to someone for how they did that project last week, how fast they did it, and how well they did it. So kudos are super important. We also do check-ins at the start of every team meetings. Scale of 1 to 10, we ask people to share. Where are you at right now on a personal level? Are you a 1, meaning you're just not doing great at all and you are stressed out, burned out, depressed, and not in a good spot? Or are you a 10? Is everything going great and are you on just top of the world? And if someone's on a 1, the bottom, we don't ask them to share. You don't have to share. It's just an opportunity if you'd like to share. We recognize that not everyone does want to share whether or not they're not feeling well. But the message for us is that we are here for you if you do want to share. And it might not be now, it could be down the road, but that's our message that we're here to support. So other tips for practicing empathy, you want to step back and listen. You want to make sure that you are aware of any emotions that are coming up from the other person or from you. So be aware of those emotions. And sometimes you want to take the opposite perspective. And what I mean by that, which can be tricky, super tricky. This is, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges for people, is you can say to yourself, you know what? So John hasn't been showing up to work the way I'm used to him showing up. He's not participating in meetings, and his actual work output isn't what it used to be. He's making so many mistakes. But I'm going to put that anger aside for a minute. I'm going to remind myself that John's going through a super tough time. Personally, I'm going to put that aside and focus on that and how I can help him with what he's dealing with. That might mean reaching out to another employee or seeing how I can help him with what he's doing. So just take the opposite perspective. So this slide is great. It shows you in this graphic way. We have three people here who are saying we know exactly how you feel. We have one person on the left who has a broken arm as well as a problem with his head. We have someone here with a broken arm, someone with just a problem with her head, and then someone who has none of those issues and appears to be just fine. And they are all saying, we know exactly how you feel. So what this graphic is trying to tell you is there's many situations where you may not understand the other person, but you can still show empathy. So with that, I'd like to share this slide now with Sarah and see if we have any questions in the short amount of time that we have.
Oh, we sure do. Cynthia, that was such great information. And I know I have a few questions, but I want to make sure we get to any audience questions first.
Yes, thank
Um,
you.
there's just so many aspects of thinking about empathy from leadership all the way down. Um, one question we have is how do you balance empathy with professional boundaries as an HR leader? How can we support and help our employees, but my role would remain distinct from that of a therapist?
Yeah, I get that question so often, and it is such it's a common question, and it's a common concern, I think, actually, from the corporate world. People have said, I don't know if I want to show empathy in the corporate world. I think it might be show a sign of weakness. But time and time again, we kind of help people to see that this is not the case. And you can set appropriate boundaries. And this is kind of a whole nother presentation with how to show an employee who's dealing with an issue in the workplace and have that boundary. But really just trying to emphasize to your employee that while it's super important that he or she perform, because obviously that's important, we're in a business here, right? So it's important that he or she perform, to emphasize the fact that you are here to support and to see what that employee is looking for. Asking those open-ended questions. Well, what would help you most? Do you want me to pull another teammate in? Do you want a day off from work? What would be most helpful for you? So really trying to better understand the employee standpoint.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was wondering if there's like just one simple way a manager can show empathy during the workday, but that's not very time consuming amongst all the other things that are going up there. Is there a way to be proactive with empathy versus reactive?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways. I mean, even just obviously we talked about earlier through body language, just, when you're talking to an employee who's dealing with a lot of issues, you want to make sure that you yourself, as the manager or as the coworker, are in a good space, meaning you're not distracted yourself. You're not trying to meet a deadline, that you are there for that person to answer whatever it is they're looking for from you. Really just trying to set up that kind of safe space for your employee. Make sure that person understands that you are here to support and you are basically there to help in any way that you can help. So sending that message, reminding them that you are willing to help and that you understand, recognizing that this is a difficult time. You can say things that just that phrase, I understand this is a really tough time for you. Like we talked about earlier, communication is so important, how you communicate, what you say.
Oh, well, thank you, Cynthia. This has been wonderful. We have a couple last minute resources to share. There's the Motion Connected Great Culture Club, and we'll email this out afterwards. But I did want to connect everyone with Cynthia's information. Are you open to questions and inquiries, Cynthia?
Yes, for sure. Please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. And I really appreciate you all joining. I hope you learned a lot. And this has just been such an honor to present. And I want to thank Sarah and her team for asking me to present. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.